Thank you for joining us at the Canadian Women's Foundation's Digital Town Hall. My name is Andrea, and I work with the Canadian Women's Foundation. Just want to let you know that if you need closed captioning in French, the link will be dropped in the chat. Please go there. And if you need closed captioning in English, you'll see at the bottom of the screen, you can access it there. The work of the Canadian Women's Foundation and that of the programs we support takes place on our traditional First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and territories. We are grateful for the opportunities to meet and work on this land. However, we recognize that land acknowledgements are not enough. We need to pursue truth, reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship in an ongoing effort to make right with all our relations. For 30 years, the Canadian Women's Foundation has been Canada's foundation for gender equality. We support women, girls, and two-spirit, trans, and non-binary people to move out of violence, out of poverty, and into confidence and leadership. I have some housekeeping before we get going. We have lots of presentations, panels, and opportunities to interact. We have videos and a performance. We are recording this event to share. Please note that we can't see any of you who are watching us today, so you don't have to worry about that. Along the way, I'll ask you to type comments in the chat box on the side of your screen. We have moderators to ensure safe, respectful conversations in the chat, and we'll be watching all the way through. We have a packed agenda, and we hope that you'll find it interesting. I want to thank you for your patience in advance if we run long. There's a short question and answer period. Please type your questions in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. Please note that we won't be checking the raised hand functions along the way. And I have a content note. We will be speaking about gender-based violence in some points. I want to encourage you to take care of yourself along the way. Step away if you need to, come back when ready. And I'd like to draw your attention to sheltersafe.ca, which is a website that lists shelters and transition housings for gender-based violence in all regions of the country. And if you would like more services in your region, you can go to canadianwomen.org to find them. And final note to our panelists, thank you for joining us. And please remember to please speak in a paced manner for our interpreters and closed captioners along the way. Now I'm going to turn it over to President and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation, Paulette Senior.
Thank you, Andrea. Thanks everyone for joining us this lovely afternoon. I'm hailing from the GTA, Greater Toronto Area, and I hope it's lovely wherever you are. So yes, my name is Paulette Senior, President and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation. And since the start of this situation, and which is a pandemic that we're living in, advocates have sounded the alarm about increased risk of gender-based violence, including intimate partner abuse and sexual assault. There have been many red flags. Crisis services have reported increased calls for support, and police reported domestic disturbances have increased significantly. Our donors have generously given toward meeting the increased needs for support. The Government of Canada has also partnered with us to provide emergency funds for gender-based violence programs in Canada. Since April 2020, the Canadian Women's Foundation has secured $33.6 million in federal pandemic response support for communities all across the country. This has been essential to ensure gender-based violence services can continue in this critical time. I spoke about this with the Honorable Mariam Monsef, Canada's Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Rural Economic Development. She is the first woman to be elected in the federal riding of Peterborough, Kawartha, and the first Afghan Canadian member of Parliament in Canada's history, and the first Muslim to serve as a federal cabinet minister. She has in fact led the way for precedent-setting investments in the equality movement, including over $200 million to support Canada's first ever strategy to prevent and address gender-based violence. She has also been instrumental in launching a historic fund of $100 million to support the women's movement by investing in capacity building for women's organizations. I now invite you to watch this video. So first, I'd like for you to just share with us why has the topic of gender-based violence been on the government's agenda for the past year? So can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure thing, Paulette, and hello everybody. Bonjour, salam alaikum. I'm on Mississauga territory and I wish I could be with you, but I'm joining you from my home in Peterborough, Kawartha. Gender-based violence is not a new issue. It is not new to our government. We brought in the first federal strategy in Canada's history back in 2017. And today, what we've been able to support directly is about $1 billion in supports over 5 years to frontline organizations, as well as various justice reforms. In the first couple days of the pandemic, my team and I got on the phone, and we are so fortunate that folks like Paulette and so many others in the sector take our calls and answer our questions and reply to our texts, because we asked, what should we be focused on at the Department for Women and Gender Equality over the coming months? And unanimously across the country, you all said the same thing. You said, make sure that the last door that women, children, and non-binary folks knock on when they are able to flee violence and abuse is a door that's open to them, that is safe, where staff are paid and can provide the care and professional service that they need. So it was really those conversations in the first 48 hours, Paulette, with you and many like you across the country that focused our government across a range of issues, specifically on this one, that not every home is a safe home, and we better make sure that those who know how to do this work have the emergency supports they need as soon as possible.
Thank you, Minister Monsef. Thank you. It really has been quite a partnership. I think partnership is the right word to describe the kinds of relationship that we've been able to have here at the Canadian Women's Foundation. And that partnership has really grown over the years. I think that really placed us in this position of being able to respond and activate ourselves quickly to be a continued partner during this pandemic. So thank you for the investments that you've made. And of course, you'll always hear from our sector that it's not enough, but that we're really concerned about what comes next. As you know, we've been doing some work around that in terms of preparing the sector, sharing some knowledge. But what is the plan post-pandemic? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, right now, job one is getting Canadians through the pandemic. And you're right, Paulette, we can't do this without our partners. In those early days, had it not been for Women's Shelters Canada, for yourself at the Canadian Women's Foundation, we would not have been able to deliver the funds as quickly as we were able to the front lines. That was really important to us. And because of those trusting relationships we had built with the sector, we were able to put money into people's bank accounts within a matter of days. And I know this took a lot out of your team. And I know this is a big gathering for your board, outgoing and incoming, and all those who support you. Just that work that you did, particularly in the early days, it made a world of difference. We're getting our numbers now, and some 700,000 women and children, non-binary folks in their hour of needs, not including Quebec, have been able to seek the services and receive the services they need. And it's because of you. And on behalf of the Prime Minister and the Government of Canada, I want to say thank you. Chimigwech, merci, tashakor. And these partnerships are going to enable us to continue to respond to COVID. There's another $50 million that we're rolling out now as we speak in emergency funds. And I thank you, Paulette, and your team for being one of those partners delivering those funds for us. In the coming days, we'll be announcing an additional $100 million to provide supports to frontlines. This is 3-year funding. This is meant to support organizations to respond to COVID, but also build back better. What happens in that path to build back better? You heard the Prime Minister say in the speech from the throne that women's safety is the foundation for Canada's recovery. He referred to the National Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence, which we are making progress on with provinces and territories. We met with them a few weeks ago, and we've made a significant step forward with the signed declaration that we're all going to work on a national action plan together. In the meantime, making sure that we prevent the spread of COVID, that we roll out the vaccine as quickly and as equitably as possible remains top of mind. And I know there's also a pre-budget consultation process happening right now until the 3rd week of February. So if anybody would like to provide input to our government about recovery, supports for the vulnerable, supports for women, that intersectional approach, this is a moment for you to go online to the Finance Canada website and make sure that your voice is heard, and know that we will too continue to carry your voice.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for answering the call and stepping up on these investments, which we know are important during this emergency. And I 2 more things I wanted to say to you. Well, first thing I want to say to you that this is the Canadian Women's Foundation's 30th year. So we are celebrating our 30th anniversary. And when our founders thought about that 30 years ago, our founding mothers, you know, one of the things for them was, you know, what can we do in our philanthropy to actually bring an end to gender inequality in this country. And to bring about equality for women and girls and gender diverse folks. So, you know, there's been a movement to establish a national action plan on gender-based violence. And I thought maybe I'd give you a minute or so to talk about that work, what that's shaping up to look like, and what we hope to accomplish as a result of that plan.
Well, whatever progress we make on this file, Paulette, it's because of those who've come before us. And congratulations on your 30th.
Thank you.
This is a hard year, but it's important to celebrate these very big milestones. And yes, we owe it to the very smart folks who came before us to do right by the opportunities in the past they've created for us. And the National Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence is one of those important milestones too. This took decades of advocacy by survivors, by experts on the front lines to get us to this point. And in that meeting with my provincial and territorial counterparts, we did reflect on the fact that this was the 38th meeting of the federal, provincial, territorial ministers responsible for the status of women. And this was the first time that we had all come to a formal agreement on a national action plan on gender-based violence. We recognized that it took far too long, but we also take very seriously that it is now and this particular moment in time that has brought us all onto the same page. And my colleagues in provinces and territories are really wonderful to work with. We were able to build good relationships with the federal strategy, establish trust, and of course, respect for their jurisdictions. The majority of the jurisdiction on this file is with provinces and territories. And then we were able to further strengthen those relationships with the COVID response, actually. So we shared lists and lists of organizations so that we could cross-check and cross-reference so that we didn't need to put people through an application process. Those relationships, we are now at that stage where, you know, we've spoken with some 1,500 experts during COVID about how to go about the National Action Plan. And an interesting consensus is emerging across the country. You have all said that ensuring that this strategy is centered around the experiences of Black, Indigenous, racialized folks, those with disabilities and exceptionalities, language minorities, those in rural communities, seniors, and youth and LGBTQ2 folks is key. You've told us that ensuring the stability of the sector is top of mind for you, and it is for us too. You've told us to continue to focus on prevention, but also ensure that survivors receive the care, the dignity and the respect that they deserve, whether it's seeking health services or in their pursuit for justice. We've also heard that it's important to ensure that there's supports for men and boys in addition to extra support for women's and equity-seeking organizations. So my provincial counterparts have heard this, those in the territories have heard this, and we're going to work very closely with my colleague, Minister Bennett, the minister responsible for Crown and Indigenous relationships, to make sure that the National Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence is working in parallel with the calls for justice for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls 2S inquiry, and that the two are enabling each other as they move forward. So far, the National Action Plan is moving along a 10-year timeline, which provides us with both immediate opportunities to act, but also a 10-year plan to address the deeply rooted causes of this entirely preventable crime in our country.
Well, thank you, Minister. My time is up and it does go fast, but I am just wanting to let you know how appreciative we are with the time that you've taken to be with me today to answer my questions and to do it in such a comprehensive way so that it's well said, very clear, and it's also quite obvious about the passion that you bring to this work, the respect you have for those that you're working with, as well as the future that we're creating for generations to come. So thank you so much for doing this and for taking the time today. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that interview. It's too bad we couldn't have her live, but this is the best we could do under the circumstances that were available to us. And so now we're going to learn more about our grantee partners and what they're doing to address gender-based violence in the pandemic. So I'm now going to introduce you, here she is, the one and only Keitha Mercer, who is Director of Community Initiatives and Grants. Thanks, Keitha. Over to you.
Thanks, Paulette. Hi, everyone. My name is Keitha Mercer, and I'm very happy to be working on the distribution of these grants. As you know, the pandemic has been a shared experience in some ways, but also a wildly different one in different areas of the country for individuals and communities based on lived experiences, on barriers and discriminations. As many have said, the pandemic highlights inequities and cracks in our system that have already existed, and if anything, is further deepening them. So today we are going to be chatting with 3 organizations throughout the country who have received emergency funding through our Safer and Stronger grants, which are supported by the Department of Women and Gender Equality, and are addressing the surge in need around gender-based violence services in their regions. They're going to share a little bit about what they've been doing in this emergency and what needs to happen to end violence for good. So I'm very happy and honored to introduce Andrea Silverstone from Sagesse in Calgary, Deepa Matu from Barbara Schleifer Commemorative Clinic in Toronto, and Christelle LeBlanc from Beauséjour Family Crisis Resource Center in Shediac, New Brunswick. So I believe they will be joining me on screen here. Fantastic, there you are. Hello, welcome. So I wanted to start out with asking you what it looks like in your communities. So when it comes to gender-based violence during this pandemic, what have you seen in your communities? And maybe for the first round, we'll go west to east and start with Andrea.
Thank you so much for having me and for the opportunity to share what we're seeing and for the opportunity to be a part of the great work that the Canadian Women's Foundation is doing. I think we're seeing what everybody is seeing. Our rates of domestic violence, of gender-based violence, is going up. In Alberta, we've seen our rates of violence increase about 30% for women and girls who are experiencing domestic and sexual violence. We've also seen a massive increase in informal supporters of those women and girls reaching out to our agencies to understand how to continue to be informal supporters and effective in good ways in times when we have a pandemic that stops us from gathering in the ways that we normally gather to offer support to each other. And the other thing is that we're noticing that people are using services in much different ways than they ever have before. We saw that shelter usage went down, but community services usage went way up. All of a sudden, our sector had to become experts in delivering services virtually and online, which actually I think benefited our rural and remote communities across Canada because they were able to access services in more equitable ways in the same way that everybody was. And of course, we've seen an increase in the severity and lethality of what's happening for our clients because of, I think, reports to the police went down at the beginning of the pandemic and then they went back up again. I think people waited longer to call the police when they needed to or stayed in violent situations for longer because of the fear of what was outside of their doors, although what was happening behind closed doors was also really terrible. And so as a result, we've seen that lethality go up. I think overall, we've also seen some real stress for our frontline workers in our sector who are dealing with both the pandemic and making sure that they're dealing with an increasing need and complexity from our clients. And so I think that sort of for me is the global picture. But having said all of that, I think our sector has pulled together in really amazing ways to answer the call and the need that our clients are presenting with.
Thanks, Andrea. We'll zoom over to Toronto and Deepa. Can you talk a little bit about what the pandemic has looked like in your community?
Absolutely, and I'm sorry my video gave up on me just as, it came back, okay. It's playing a dance on me, so I would just leave it alone for now. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone at the Canadian Women Foundation for inviting us and share our experience. So very similar to my colleagues here, the stay-home orders left women experiencing in trapped situations where they were trapped with their abusers in most of these circumstances. So accessing safety became really difficult right at the beginning. And as service providers were switching to provide services online, those services were not available to many communities because of the multiple layers of marginalization, racial discrimination, as well as their immigration status issue. Having an access to mobile phone, computer, or internet is not necessarily as easy as it would be for some of us who are more privileged. The close monitoring of the perpetrators and other family members further put them under duress and harm because they were losing the natural support networks that they would form otherwise in their day-to-day lives. Some of the high-risk situations and severity that we saw for the young people's experience has been really hard to navigate, as well as the pregnant women, situations with pregnant women, expectant women, and non-status women. They are finding it hardest to navigate, as well as we are finding it hardest to navigate with not having our own toolbox available to us, which we usually would be going to. I really would want to kind of echo the sentiment around the COVID fatigue and the mental health challenge that the sector is facing as well because of these strenuous circumstances that they are navigating. But we also saw something really positive. We saw pivoting, collaboration, coordination of services. We saw community coming together for many of our survivors. Peer support came forward, donors came forward, and past clients came forward to support as well. So a lot of positive sentiment, but being a women-led sector and a caregiver-led sector, the reality of mothers with young children working at home, trying to navigate these situations has been pretty hard, as for everyone else.
Thank you, Deepa. And thank you both for recognizing not only how the sector has come together, but also how hard they're working on top of, we're all working on top of an already stretched workload. Crystal, can you tell us a little bit more about what it's been like in your community?
Sure. New Brunswick has one of the highest rates of domestic homicide. So of course there were immediate concerns about what would happen to those numbers during the spike of the pandemic for us in New Brunswick. One of the biggest challenges when you pivot to virtual is not only getting victims, cell phones, but it's the feeling that the staff have for, they set up a call, they know they're supposed to talk to their client, and then the client doesn't call. And there's a big part of you that you know she's hiding in a closet and you're concerned that maybe something's happened or he's found out. Or so it's the idea of having just that 10 minutes while she goes to walk the dog to be able to try and sort out her safety in the quickest way possible and to sort out how to get her to services. I think one thing I'd like to highlight, particularly in our province, was the spike in requests for emergency intervention orders. New Brunswick was one of the last provinces to have emergency intervention orders. So even though they weren't maybe well known to the community yet, there was a spike in requests to get them done. And as much as there's both government and nonprofit organizations who are trained to be the assisters, we soon found out that the only people that were doing them was, of course, the women's-based nonprofit organizations. So that was exceptionally difficult on already strained staff. Having said that, I think what is positive about the pandemic, we do talk about the negative side. I think what's positive is the funding that allowed us to do things that we otherwise wouldn't have ever been able to do, and to think differently about how to meet people where they're at. And I think it also raised a spotlight on the fact that domestic violence was already a pandemic. You know, we were living a pandemic. So I think for the public and for the press in particular, who of course, you know, found it interesting to better understand what it means to be stuck at home and not to be able to break free from domestic violence, it shed a spotlight on it. And I'm hopeful that as terrible as it's been, that it may shift the thinking of what's needed for core sustainability for our organizations, or at least it's being talked about more. I don't think that the same spotlight would be on it if it wasn't for COVID-19. So I think in that situation, there's an opportunity and a desire and maybe an avenue for change.
Thanks, Crystal. And you mentioned a little bit about the funding. Can you tell us a bit about how your organization has been responding to these challenges and how you've used the emergency funding?
So we had received different batches of funding during COVID-19. So specifically funding from the Canadian Women's Foundation through the federal government. Some of our funding was that we offer sexual assault services. And one of the biggest challenges was we had a RCMP comfort room and we had just built a new building, but we had no funding for the actual equipment so that statements could be done at our location instead of the police detachment. And because of COVID-19, we weren't able to go with women to our detachment because basically the interrogation room, which is the same one they use, by the way, for abusers, was like a closet. So they were basically saying, sorry, it's the client only and the police officer. And we have big problems with that. We have advocacy work we need to get done. So we were able to provide, you know, a safe COVID-19 friendly service because we had bigger space. We just didn't have the equipment. And it's not something I could have ever afforded if the COVID-19 funding wasn't available. Through the Safer and Stronger grant that we received just a week ago, we're excited because there's funding for us to be able to download the WISH software. Over 10 years ago, we developed a problem with our database, and we're in a rural, remote community, and we do our best and we're grassroots. So we were doing everything on paper, counting our stats, and it's impossible when your numbers start to spike like they have been during the pandemic. So it became critical that we had a database to be able to, upload a perpetrator's photo, and so that way there we can just more effectively case manage our files. So something like that, I wouldn't have been able to take from my regular budget, not with the crazy cost and PPE supplies and everything else that we're having to do. So definitely the software is going to be critical. There was also funding for us to hire somebody part-time to help us with the increase in mental health issues that we're seeing for our second stage clients. So it's just been such a blessing to be able to do those things.
Thanks, Crystal. We've heard a lot about the need to upgrade technology or get technology, and organizations were struggling to get by before the pandemic, but when everybody moves to working from home, it was even more necessary. Deepa, can you talk a little bit about how your organization has been responding and how you've been using the emergency funds?
Yeah, sure. So for the clinic, I think right at the beginning, the late March, when the lockdown started happening, it was really important for us to send the message to the community and the survivors we work with that our doors won't close and we will remain open. And our messaging was we will remain open till we are told not to. So we very quickly pivoted, and we were fortunate because we were already on a cloud system, so it was easy for us to get a lot of our direct service staff to set up home offices. But what we needed to do was to remain open in our main office, where we could still receive clients, the unplanned walk-ins, or those emergency situations where people need in-person services still amid the pandemic. So we were able to use the funds made available through emergency funding to bring in self-care packages for survivors, cell phones, tablets, SIM cards. We got some donations, and some of the emergency funding money supported us. We were able to get plexiglass installed throughout the space so that people who are coming into the clinic, which we called a high-risk team, which included mainly managers and a couple of our admin staff. Till today, we take turns in rotations. Today, I am in office and I'm speaking from that space. We made sure that the space was safe for us and people dropping in and coming in, which has been extremely, extremely helpful. We have also been able to do a lot of education, a lot of support groups for the sector as well as the survivors. We have been running webinars for sexual assault survivors, for women who are criminalized, especially non-status folks who are criminalized, and the criminalization saw a spike through this time. So a lot of this money which came through the emergency supports made it possible for us to remain open and remain committed to what we said right at the beginning. We will remain open till we are asked to close. And we were fortunate that we were declared an essential service, and that did help. And we have been able to utilize our large meeting rooms for safe zones for meetings throughout this whole time. One of the other really important a resource that the funding was able to create for us was to have safe platforms for women to connect with us, which otherwise is not possible. So we very quickly discovered that an email from Schleifer is not necessarily the right email to receive. So having access to the technology, which could morph and hide the identity of the Zoom platform or hide the identity of the emails, all of those features that are really otherwise very difficult to access, we have been discovering those and making sure that our services remain available in a safe way. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepa. And Andrea, back over to the west side of the country. How have you been able to respond?
So one of the things that's really interesting that's happened during the pandemic is that all of the things that I think that we knew about how clients help seek have not been the way that clients have helped seek, that women and children have helped seek during this process of COVID. And so, like I mentioned before, all of a sudden we saw that the rates of people who were using shelters went way down. The rates of people who were calling the police went way down. Although calls to crisis lines went up somewhat, it wasn't as much as we expected. And so the question was, we know that people are trapped in their home with their abuser. Where are they going? And so we actually partnered with a data analytics company called Help Seeker and the University of Calgary, Shift the Project End Domestic Violence, to ask that question. And one of the things that the first thing that happened is when Help Seeker did a data analytics on help seeking based on Google metrics, which I can't explain to you because I don't understand. What I do understand is that they said to us, the Google searches for domestic violence services in Alberta have gone up 136% since the COVID pandemic began. And so we knew that whatever we were doing was not meeting the clients where they're at, which is one of our core principles. And so we partnered with Help Seeker and Shift the Project End Domestic Violence to create a project called Data to Action, where we're trying to get real-time data from participating data contributors from across the province of Alberta about how service usage and rates of domestic violence look, as well as doing behind-the-scenes system mapping and Google metrics around how clients are help seeking and how they're moving from service to service in a time and using them very differently, so that we can inform our sector and the Alberta government and other investors investors about how investment needs to change and be flexible during this time. One of the things that I've really appreciated about the Canadian Women's Foundation and other funders is that there's been real conversations about, we funded you for this thing, but we know that clients probably aren't showing up that way anymore. Do you want us to move the funding over this way? But we need to know how to move it. And part of what the Data to Action project is going to tell us is that information. And so we've been very lucky to get some very key data contributors already on board in Alberta, like Alberta Health Services and, our major police services, but also, the large shelters, as well as, on grassroots domestic violence and faith-based organizations. And so I know that this is actually a project that we would like to eventually see Canada-wide, because I think that Alberta is not the only place experiencing this knowledge gap around how clients are help seeking in a different way. So thank you. It's super exciting, and we'll let you know when the first data dashboard is published.
Yes, please. I think it'll be really key information for all of us. Thank you all for being here and for the hard work you're doing. I know that this pandemic has created all sorts of new challenges for you. And one thing I always say is how amazing women's organizations are at adapting and collaborating and figuring out how to meet the needs. So thank you for being here and for the hard work you do every day. If your organization does gender-based violence programming and would like to apply for the Safer and Stronger program, we'll put the link up in the chat, but it's also on our website. The next deadline is Tuesday, February 16th. And we are looking forward to continuing to support programs like these three and other ones throughout the country. I'm going to pass it on now to my colleague, Sally Demachke, manager of the Investment Readiness Program, to introduce a special performance.
Thank you, Keitha, and thank you everyone for sharing the wonderful work that you've been doing on the ground. It's so lovely to hear. So as Keitha mentioned, we're really excited to have a special performance with us. Our performer is Harleen, who was born in Montreal. She's a South Asian writer, artist, and educator, and her practice is entrenched in feminist and anti-racist principles and community building approaches. So as an educator, she uses arts-based approaches to facilitate grassroots youth programming, understanding that artistic self-expression in safe and loving settings can really become a catalyst for that collective healing and transformative change that we are all looking for. She's really dedicated to creating these spaces in her community. So today, as she writes her book of poetry, she's thankful to be part of the beautiful connection that often accompanies the sharing of our vulnerabilities. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'd love to for you to tell us about what you'll be performing for us today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Harleen. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And also, I'm so honored to be here in this way. We also partner. I'm, as well as a spoken word artist, I also work at the South Asian Women's Community Center in Montreal. And so we're a partner of CWF, and I've just been so, it's just been so touching to not only see my colleagues just show up in the ways that we have for this frontline work, but also now hear all the other organizations across the country doing the same. And it's just so wonderful. And I think we are truly warriors. So today I'm going to perform a few pieces. The first half, in a way, is a triptych of poems. So it's going to be 3 poems, and then later on one longer poem. And I will say that there's content warning for a lot of metaphor, but there's not a lot of many literal depictions of gender-based violence, but these are poems that talk about violence and abuse. So definitely take care of that, take care of yourselves. And even though I use a lot of metaphors, obviously it could trigger something inside of you still. So feel free to take care of yourselves. Mute me out if you need to, if it's too much for you. Definitely take care of yourself. And I will also say that my first poem starts a little hopeless. And I think it's still a reflection of what survivors feel and go through. And I hope that as the poetry goes on, even though it's still on the topic of gender-based violence, that it feels better by the end of my performance. So I will also take a pause between poems, so you'll know when I'm switching gears a little bit. Maybe I won't speak. Maybe I won't speak. When they tell me to keep my mouth shut, I trust them. They tell me they know better than me. Maybe I won't speak. Those who hold the weapons know how easy it is to use them. There are no empty threats. Maybe I won't speak. Because all I have is my armor, but this armor is only enough to protect, not enough to fight. Because I am barely standing. What purpose does it serve to again get knocked off my feet? Maybe I won't speak. Because why speak into a void, into an empty chamber? And if my words turn into echoes, aggressive and wanting redemption, how are collapsing walls anything less than self-destruction? Maybe I won't speak. And although my body holds vocal cords in this throat, I was taught to speak only if it served them. My voice is borrowed. Maybe I won't speak. Because speaking feels like bleeding these days, and I don't have anything left to bleed. Fatigue plagued arms, I can feel bone deep. There's a riot outside. There's a storm outside. Maybe I'll stay within my concrete walls and sleep. When the fire burns out, you have nothing left to feed. So maybe I will sleep. Maybe I will sleep. Maybe I will sleep till the darkness blooms into cherry blossoms. Maybe I'll stay asleep. Is there a river here to bathe in? What's it made of? Empty bottles on my nightstand roll in Tucson. I've forgotten what it feels like to even feel love. You have known them your whole life, learned which voice of yours calms their storms, tore through the armor of their hearts to find their secrets, and perfected the craft of growing under their grip. But just because you have learned how to bear, tame, even love those whose hearts have been cracked and turned violent, does not mean you deserve a life of breathing into the palms of abusers. Today, I asked myself, what would happen if the pain inside was felt again? This time, without any shame or disappointment or envy. What happens when pain is revisited? This time with the chance to hold the space, rather than be told it is not in any way deserving. Today I release the pain. Let it play among the warm rays of sunshine, and my body thanked me by melting into itself and giving warmth back to me. Thank you. So those were my first 3 poems. My next piece, it's one piece, but it kind of has 3 short parts, or I think they're short anyway, shorter. And yeah, it is actually going to be the first poem of a book I'm going to self-publish this year, and it's also the first poem I've ever written officially. And it's just so funny that I keep coming back to it, and so for me that it means it's very special to me, and I hope it'll be the same for you. called A House and a Storm. Here I build my house at the edge where coast meets water, because even though the raging sea will soon carry my house away, I like the sound of the waves. My house is temporary. I built it for the storm. The sound of thunder in the distance is deafening, and I don't want to look outside into the night's shadows, even though I know they are more beautiful than light. My roof is leaking. I try to patch up the cracks as much as I can. Other days, I let the water drench me. And I know this is no way to clean myself. I'm so sorry, I repeat. I'm so sorry. I can't tell you in words how cold it is, but I tell myself I am surviving. My body feels fragile, it feels weak. I hate that. Yet somehow it bears this cold with such resilience, it surprises me. Must be resilience I inherited. My mother was a warrior in the cold, but that didn't stop her from hating it. The storm continues to pass through at the edge of the coast where water meets sand, my house somewhere in between. I wonder what I am waiting for, if it will ever come, or if I will have to leave before it does. My house is temporary after all. The walls are starting to weaken. I wonder how many days have passed. Time is a concept trapped in memory, but that is something I admire about this house. In this storm of darkness and noise, I am trapped inside a timeless box. The wind is starting to pass through. I have no windows, but now the walls are starting to feel transparent, and I'm starting to see through them. This will not do, so I rebuild. Even a temporary house needs maintenance. Let me tell you about my candle. Yes, there is a candle. I hold it in my hand even as I work on my house. It is strong and it is gentle, so tranquil in this storm. On days I am drunk from its radiating warmth, days when I'm too tired to tend to my house, I wonder where the light came from. If it was sent from the heavens or if it was ignited deep from the earth below my feet. Some days I think of it as my rose. I protect it with my body from the drops of cold water leaking through my roof and from the winds that always seem to find the cracks in my walls. My candle flickers with aggression sometimes, but it never seems to dwindle. I always come to realize that my candle takes care of me. On days I cry into the earth, my body breaking into the dirt, one arm stretched out from instinct, reaching out, the other holding the candle that somehow keeps my heart warm. How does it manage to do that? My house is temporary. I patch up my roof, build more layers for my walls, but soon I will be gone. My candle keeping me warm, keeping me safe, keeping me focused. Let me tell you about resilience. It only lasts as long as your mind does. It only gives as much as your body does. Yet my candle does not demand me to be strong, does not demand my determination. I cry into it tears of madness, defeat from a storm that never seems to pass. It gives color back to me, pours it into my eyes, into my chest, never receding. Can you imagine a light like that? In a storm of darkness and noise, in this temporary house, can you imagine a love like that? Thank you.
Thank you so much and so deeply for sharing these beautiful, beautiful words and experiences. Really appreciate it. I think I can speak for everyone. Take a moment to just let it sinking and take some deep breath. That took me really to another place. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I'm going to pass it back to Paulette Senior now.
I couldn't agree more, Sally. That just left me in a space of warmth and reflection. And thank you so much, Harleen, for taking us to a space that possibly we haven't been in a while. Our hearts, our minds, and a place that we can think. So thank you so much. So I'm now going to take the next few minutes to just reflect on the past, talk a bit about the present and the future with you, along with the comments I'm about to make or the presentation. I also invite you to type your questions, as you have already, in the Q&A box, and participate in the polls that we're going to be asking you some questions over the next little while. So you'll see them show up on the screen. Let me begin by saying or repeating what you have already heard. Thank you, Andrew, for being the slide manager for me. Let me just start by saying that 2021, as you've heard, is the Canadian Women's Foundation's 30th anniversary. So 30 years since we've been around, and you may wonder how this happened. So in 1986, two grade school friends, Nancy Ruth and Susan Woods, you can see their pictures here, were discussing what they could do to build philanthropy or gender equality efforts in Canada. And they were two of 8 visionary founding mothers who launched the Canadian Women's Foundation in 1991 to galvanize feminist philanthropy and advance gender equality. That first year, the foundation awarded $50,000 in grants to organizations. And thank you to our founding mothers, our 8 founding mothers that you see here. Let me just take a moment to name them: Nancy Ruth, Susan Woods, Rosemary Brown, Mary Eberts, Dawn Elliott, Julie White, Kay Seeger Johnson, and Elizabeth Stewart. I would like to acknowledge that 2 of our founding mothers may actually be on this call, Nancy Ruth and Julie White. If they are, please be acknowledged and know how much we love you, and thank you so much that you created this foundation with us that we're now leading. I'd also like to acknowledge that Beverly Wybrow, who is the long-standing former president of the Canadian Women's Foundation, is also with us. She was critical to the foundation's remarkable growth. And I am actually very honored to be carrying on the torch that she lit, which I took on in 2016. Since its early days, the impact of the foundation has only increased. Since 1991, our generous donors and supporters have contributed more than $130 million to fund over 2,000 life-transforming programs throughout Canada. So you heard that we started 50,000. 30 years later, we've been able to contribute over $130 million. So thank you to our founders, donors, board members, employees, partners, corporate partners, colleagues, collaborators, you know who you are, and friends. And all of you have tirelessly enabled incredible impact in every province and territory over 30 years. The images that you see give you a brief glimpse into the people and initiatives over the past 30 years since we started. We have had a storied history, storytelling. We have had many achievements and faced many challenges. Some moments lifted our hearts with inspiration. Some have brought us introspection and necessary change. They have all been important to our growth, and we're grateful that you believe in us and have kept us here. You have enabled women, girls, and gender diverse people to find fresh starts and get the support they need to move out of violence, out of poverty, and into confidence and leadership. You have enabled systemic change to move the needle on gender equality in Canada, and there is, in fact, no Canadian Women's Foundation without you. So let's fast forward to today. We have all faced immense challenges in 2020 and 2021. 30 years of gender equality gains are now at risk in the pandemic. Women's participation in the workforce at historic lows. Risk of gender-based violence has increased. Increased, and we also know that women's participation has been hit hard. High COVID-19 risks to older women and racialized women and majority essential workers have been burdensome. They're tasked with the burden of caregiving demands. These are the conditions, just some of the conditions that folks have been living with. So remember, I said I'm going to ask you and encourage you to share what gendered impacts of the pandemic concern you with your and your community most. So just remember that as we ask you some questions, you can participate. So women have been amongst the hardest hit in the pandemic, particularly women facing multiple barriers and inequities. The problems are not new. They have been only intensified in the shocks of the pandemic. 30 years ago, the Canadian Women's Foundation was founded to put Canada on a fast track to equity. Time has come to double down and build a new normal. As the Honorable Rosemary Brown, one of our founding mothers, said, until all of us have made it, none of us have made it. That is the vision of gender justice we can all get behind. And this is what we have done over 2020 and what we intend to do alongside all of you in 2021 and into the future. So the priorities. Priority one, we have been moving critical funds to communities. So this is important. In the economic challenges of the pandemic and reduced fundraising revenues in Canada's charitable sector, our donors have kept steady in supporting economic security, ending gender-based violence, promoting girls' empowerment, and supporting inclusive leadership. We are very thankful for that support. We have moved forward with our Northern strategy to build strong relationships with underserved communities in Canada's North. We have established partnerships. We're building an advisory committee and laying the groundwork that is critical for this work. We're happy to say we've started grant making through the strategy, and we're excited to move significant funds to great projects in the North. In March 2020, we launched the Tireless Together Fund, a nationwide emergency effort to mobilize philanthropy in the pandemic. Our supporters contributed over $500,000 in emergency funds toward this effort, which went out in grants to organizations pushing hard to respond to elevated community need and reduce capacity. We also partnered with the Government of Canada, as you heard before, to secure emergency funds for women-serving organizations in every region of the country. Since April 2020, we secured $33.6 million in rapid pandemic response funds to communities, for communities, and that is getting out to programs all throughout the country doing gender justice work. So moving forward to 2021, we will continue to distribute annual grants and multi-year grants. These grants will meet urgent community needs related to the pandemic, make strides with innovative new approaches to ongoing community challenges like poverty, violence, and marginalization, and will go toward proven local solutions that you heard about in the previous panel towards gender justice and responding to gender-based violence. Our second priority, we have been learning with grassroots partners and mapping unprecedented change. And it's really about rebuilding after the pandemic and set Canada up for gender equity. We need to pursue fundamental change. In 2020, we facilitated and co-authored Resetting Normal, which is a series of influential policy papers that outlined critical steps for decision makers to take for a gender equal Canada coming out of the pandemic. So moving forward to 2021, this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to collect data on the experiences of diverse women, girls, and gender diverse people to inform our systems change work. For example, we're going to be doing community-based research on how to best respond to and prevent spikes in gender-based violence in emergency situations. We're also supporting a new research partnership that gender-based violence about the gender-based violence faced by Black women, girls, and trans and gender diverse people in Canada, and what actually needs to happen to best address it. We will continue to foster a network of grassroots partners across the country to learn from each other as they respond to urgent community needs related to gender injustice. And we will continue to support ongoing evaluation, critical evaluation of our multi-year grants, because we want to learn what impact our efforts are making and having to transform lives and communities, and what lessons we can take forward to sharpen our approach into the future. The final priority, it's about the fact that we have kept gender justice in the national spotlight. The impacts of the pandemic will be felt long after the virus recedes. And as Canada's public foundation for gender equality, we take the long view to understand trends, respond to evidence, and push for best practices to end gender injustice. So in 2021, we will urge federal, provincial, and territorial governments to put gender equality at the center of post-pandemic recovery efforts. We will amplify the promise of gender justice and serve as a strong voice in media so decision makers and the public hear the call for action. We will generate public awareness to bring together women, girls, and gender diverse folks who want to support the cause in their own communities and workspaces. And we will spread the word about the Signal for Help and other public campaigns and tools to build safety and rights at a time of intensified risk of gender-based violence. We will also sit at every significant policy table to ensure that our voices are heard on gender-related issues. And finally, we will continue to develop our own intersectional feminist approach, implementing an internal, systemic, anti-racism plan addressing racism against Black and Indigenous people and people of color, and developing our principles of feminist philanthropy and grant making. Why? Because gender justice starts at home. So in the Zoom chat, I encourage you to share which of these three priorities excite you most, and tell us why. Tell us why you're interested in them. So moving on, here's what the community investment here's what community investment meant in 2019 and 2020 year. About $14 million was contributed to communities through grants, and $4.2 million was contributed to communities through advocacy and policy change work, capacity building efforts for the gender equality sector, and evaluating the impact of grants to learn and improve approaches. So that was important. That's how the money was spent. Our official financial report, if you're interested, for fiscal year 2020 will be available in just a few weeks on our website. And moving forward in 2021 and beyond, you are needed more than ever. And here are the opportunities for change making that we're all asking all of you to do, all Canadians to do to support. So these are the 3 ways that we're recommending. We want you to help us meet urgent community needs, quick responses, innovative approaches, tried and true solutions. Every year, the Canadian Women's Foundation distributes over 25 one-year grants to issues that need attention now. Whether it's pandemic proofing a program or piloting a new gender equality initiative in a radically changing world, these flexible and fast grants make sure communities have help where they need it most. So that's the first one. The second is about empowering community impact. While gender inequality impacts everyone in Canada, every community is impacted differently depending on where they are and the unique barriers facing women and girls and gender diverse folks where they live. By supporting multi-year grants to grassroots community organizations, these communities are supported to deliver tailored local programs to end violence, empower girls, and build inclusive leadership, and support women's economic stability. This supports thousands of people and makes positive ripple benefits across communities. There's also the need to bolster the movement for gender justice. So this is the third. People need to be supported in moments of crisis, but we also must address the historical injustices and hidden legacies that lead to the crisis in the first place. This root cause work enables collective learning and action on the national agenda, and together we will spark the systems change Canada needs for an equitable and just pandemic recovery. So again, your opportunity to participate. Please share which of these 3 opportunities speak to you most, and also tell us why it does. So thank you for that. That's the work that we've been doing over the past year. And now we're going to move into a short Q&A. And this is my opportunity to introduce none other than the chair of our board at the Canadian Women's Foundation, Angela Johnson. And Sally, I'm going to invite you back. Sally Damashki, who you heard from before, who's a manager of investment readiness program, and they will who will read out the questions for this very short Q&A we're about to do. Over to you, Sally.
Absolutely. So the first question I have here is, how do we address issues that require psychosocial support for immigrant women who are going through trying times during the pandemic? And how do we provide a healing process as many women are victims of gender-based violence in their previous nations of residence?
Well, that is not an easy question, but it's a very important question because we do know that immigrant women have particular challenges that those of us who've been in Canada a long time or who were born here do not. And so at the Canadian Women's Foundation, we take great care to ensure that the grants that we provide are going to organizations that need it most. And a lot of those organizations, as we talked about, are immigrant women's organizations. So we fund a number of them across the country to ensure that they're providing the supports that immigrant women need in their communities. Those supports will vary. Those supports will cover issues around economic stability. So it could be an employment training program. It could be developing the employability skills, understanding what the Canadian landscape is when it comes to job search. It could also be providing support groups that are needed. So it covers a range of issues. And so the job that we have to do at the Canadian Women's Foundation is ensure that our funding is reaching those organizations, communities that need it most. And a lot of those organizations and communities are immigrant women's organizations.
Absolutely. And to build on that, there is a question around, under the specific circumstances of the pandemic, how is it possible to help women who are facing domestic violence and gender-based violence?
Mm-hmm. Well, you've heard a lot about that today, whether through the work of some of our grantees and what they're doing, but also I talked earlier about the funding that we have been providing to our grantees, but also the systemic change work that is necessary, that we need to do. We know that the pandemic has really brought to the fore these issues in a way that we have been trying to for decades. For decades, we've been trying to tell the story, and in many ways, it felt like it was falling on deaf ears. But in today's environment, during this pandemic, of which gender-based violence is also and has also been a pandemic, it's impossible now for, I think, governments to ignore that this is critical. So organizations such as what you've heard from earlier are needing the funding. Our job is to raise the money from a number of different sources. It could be the corporate sector that has stepped up in a significant way in the past year. Individuals have also stepped up and seen the need to actually increase their giving, and the critical role that government plays needs to continue and be increased. So these are some of the ways, but also on an individual level, folks can give. Your giving matters, because were it not for individual donors and corporate support that we've received over the years, we would not have been here for 30 years doing this work. So I mean it when I say that it's because of you why we're here, it's because of you why we'll continue. And so we do need your individual support as well. And whatever you can do in your community, at your places of work, that's really what we need to happen going forward.
Well said, Paulette.
These are really hard questions as well. So thank you, Paulette, for sharing. I see there's a few more questions. I'm not sure how much time we have, but
you want to do one more?
Let's do that.
Okay.
So there was a question around how the affordable housing for women that was promised enables women to leave.
Mm-hmm. Before I mention the importance of being at every significant policy table, discussing issues that are impacting women's lives, right? So housing is one of those tables that we're at. Sometimes I think that we need to multiply ourselves 3 or 4 times to be at all of these tables, but you cannot in any way underestimate how critical housing is to stabilizing women's lives, to stabilizing the lives of folks who particularly have suffered from gender-based violence and have escaped with themselves and or their children. And so we know homelessness continues to be an issue in Canada. We also know that homelessness over the years has looked very different for women than men. And so being able to respond to that in a way that meets women where they're at is very important. Being able to protect women, because women who are homeless are actually more susceptible to various types of violence, sexual violence, gender-based violence. And so it's important that we're pushing our government representatives to be able to do that. So that's one of the tables that we're sitting at the Canadian Women's Foundation, to ensure that that it's not left out in terms of the discussions we're having, and an important part of the recovery during the pandemic as well.
Thank you, Paulette. And there's a few questions here about eligibility criteria and next steps, how people can help. So can you share with folks what they can do to learn more about that?
Well, I think Andrea earlier, and maybe she can send it again, sent out a link about the Safer, Stronger funds. So there she is with her thumbs up. So she's doing that. And I'm sure that one of my colleagues, Suzanne Duncan, may have a bit more to say than I've said before with respect to how you can help. Suzanne, did you want to just lend a word here?
Thank you, Paulette. Absolutely. I think you really spoke well to this. One of the most important things that we can do right now, if we're able, is to donate to the Canadian Women's Foundation or to other organizations that are making sure women, girls, and gender diverse people have what they need to get through this. I know many folks here have volunteered for years. Many folks here have done lots of things in their communities. And with the challenges that we have around the pandemic, right now, the most important thing is if you're able to support, because those kinds of funds are going to allow organizations like the ones we've heard from already pivot to the kinds of protections that they need to do to keep women, girls, and gender diverse people safe right now.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. Thank you. All right. I'm just want to make sure that I can get some words in here from to make sure that I'm thanking a great group of women who continue to inspire and impress me every single day. So let me just let you know, these are the women that I work with. I've worked with them in person, and I'm working with them virtually. It's been quite seamless, although I miss you all in terms of just having that personal touch. These are special people who have worked hard over a very challenging year, giving their all to support the foundation's grantees, donors, partners, and colleagues. I call them the Dream Team, and I want to personally thank each and every one of you for all the work you do. I just want you to know that the foundation, you are in fact the foundation. This is who you are. And I'm so thankful for all that you do in your places of residence, in different parts of the country. And without you doing that work, we wouldn't be where we are today. So thank you. You are the energy and drive behind the Canadian Women's Foundation. I want to specifically acknowledge our own Beth Malcolm, who is our VP of Community Initiatives and who has had the audacity to tell us that she's retiring this year. So we're having to say goodbye, but I would prefer to say so long as opposed to goodbye, as she moves on to whatever the future will bring her. This is a woman who has been just a rock for the foundation, who is tireless in the work that she does. She's been a tireless advocate for gender justice. She's loved by many, and adapting the word Ubuntu is actually a beautiful description of how Beth works and what you mean to us. We are Beth because you are. So you will hear from Beth later on, but now I want to thank and congratulate her now, because I may not get a chance later. She will be sorely missed by all of us, and you better not go too far, because however and whenever we can pull you back, we will. So now I'm going to, and it is my pleasure to pass the floor over to my esteemed board chair, Angela Johnson. Over to you, Angela.
Thank you, Paulette. Hello, everyone. I would like to take a minute or so to focus on our board of directors. They are tireless champions, ensuring we stay true to our mandate to build gender equality in Canada. Thank you, board of directors, for the ways you rise to the challenge. We are bidding a fond farewell to departing board members this year, starting with past chair Kristen Blakely Cosman, Danielle Bisnar, Jennifer Flanagan, Shauna Hoyt, past co-chair Jody Johnson, Marilyn Roycroft, and past treasurer Paula Smith. These ladies have given their time, energies, and skills to propel the foundation forward. Thank you for being tireless. On behalf of the board, I would also like to welcome new board members who are joining us this year. And those members are Jazz Hottie, Peggy Moss, Sarah Robinson, Minu Sikand, Olivia Sobey, and Sandy Vanderzeel. Thank you for joining the board. We look forward to working with you in the future. Now I'm going to pass the floor to Sigal Dula, Director of the Investment Readiness Program. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, and thank you, past and present board members, for all your tireless efforts. Hi, I'm Sigal Duale. I just take a minute to share a little bit about the Investment Readiness Program. It's a program funded by the Government of Canada with the goal of supporting social purpose organizations as they contribute to solving social, cultural, and environmental challenges. And we're really honored to serve as one of the partners in the program, helping organizations become more prepared for investment. And for the last year and a half, we've been helping to build up women serving organizations to join the social finance ecosystem. And this year has been very challenging for many, including entrepreneurs and social enterprises. So I spoke with some of the participants in the program to see how they're faring and what they've learned in terms of business recovery. And I hope you enjoy the short video that we'll play for you right now. So with us today, we have 2 enterprising organizations and 4 amazing women in the program, Dames Making Games and Nisa Homes, which is a project of the National Zakat Foundation, to share with us a little bit about the business recovery in the midst of the pandemic. So in these kind of new realities, some enterprising charities and nonprofits are really being creative, and they're pivoting their ventures, and they're looking to social enterprise or social finance to stabilize and support their work. So what I'm interested in, what we're all interested to hear from you is, we'd love for you to share with us 3 lessons that you've learned on business recovery during the pandemic.
Yeah, so I think our IRP program is a bit different because we're supporting other folks creating their own game studios. But through this whole pandemic, DMG has always been very centered around giving space, physical space to marginalized people. And I think, you know, we've used technology and tools in a way to try and continue that community support that was always created around our physical space. So it's been a lot of experimenting with tools and making sure that we can still create that community support and learning, support all of these new founders through the pandemic. And I think particularly we have a lot of artists and creative individuals, and you know, helping them actually use tools online and be able to continue creating art and cultural products has been really important during this pandemic for our community.
So one of the key things we really took to heart was slowing down and acknowledging that everybody's energies were really in unpredictable places. And that helped us sort of refine those projects that we wanted to invest in. And I think Sigal, said it best. It's, all of the inequities that existed before the pandemic have been amplified. So what can we do to use this time where we're slowing down and refining our work to sort of scope our energy and investment of time into programs in a way that gives people who have been marginalized and pushed out of these spaces in the past a leg up.
We've had to make a lot of changes in terms of how we provide our services due to COVID, in terms of reducing the numbers that we have in shelters, and a huge increase in the kinds of supports that we offer to community members outside of the shelter. So from an outreach perspective or a remote perspective.
The project is essentially a research piece where we're kind of researching what the market potential is for the community-centric thrift store, what kind of beneficiaries are out there, what kind of donations are we able to get, what kind of client portfolios we're looking at. So essentially this whole period has been an unforeseen opportunity for us to tap into the alternative and virtual options out there that would ensure that this business, this social enterprise, is developed in a way without, with even more safety and with those kind of buffer zones in place as we launch it.
So we're going to pass it back to Sally. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about envisioning real economic security. So as you know, economic security is a significant challenge during the pandemic, and it has always been a challenge before that for women and gender diverse folks all over the country, but especially for migrant workers, workers with precarious status, and marginalized and exploited workers. So our colleague, Karen Campbell, who is the program manager for community initiatives, had a conversation with some of our grantees to get a window into the issues they're seeing at the moment in their regions. So we'll be hearing from Leah Woolner, who leads the exploitation, trafficking, and systemic change program of the Mouvement contre le viol et l'inceste in Montreal, Tony Sinclair, the executive director of the Elizabeth Fry Society of Northern Alberta, which runs a housing project for Indigenous women who have experienced sexual exploitation and trafficking, and Faye Faraday, who leads the Migrant Women's Rights Project at the Barbara Schleifer Clinic in Toronto.
Over the last year, we've seen the obvious and disproportionate impact that the pandemic is taking on women personally and economically. And some are even calling this situation a she-cession, as women are bearing the brunt of job losses and increased caregiving demands. So just thinking about beyond the numbers that we're seeing in media and the reports that are coming out, maybe you can share with us what you're seeing on the ground. What has the pandemic meant for the livelihoods of the women that you work with, and how have their livelihood strategies had to change as a result of the pressures that the pandemic is putting on them? Maybe we can start with Tony in Alberta.
Absolutely. For the women who access our services, they've had to make impossible choices amidst this pandemic, absolutely impossible choices. They've had to choose between paying rent and feeding their children. They've had to choose between having lack of resources and fleeing abusive relationships. They've had to choose between working or keeping their kids in school. It's been an impossible position that they've been placed in through no fault of their own.
Thanks, Tony. Faye, how does this compare with what you're seeing with the women you're working with in Toronto?
Well, with the migrant women that I'm working with, there have been two very different experiences. One is of women who have lost their jobs entirely because they were working for people who themselves lost their jobs or who are now working from home. And so for migrant care workers, they can't afford to retain them. So those women have lost their jobs and lost their homes, but are also stuck in limbo where they can't regularize their immigration status or return to their home countries because of travel bans. At the other end of the scale, there are women whose jobs have completely intensified because they're doing even more work under even more precarious circumstances than they were previously. And again, if I give the example of migrant care workers, there are care workers who have essentially been under house arrest in the homes of their employers since the pandemic began. And the way that their mental health has been absolutely destroyed, along with their precariousness economically, has been devastating.
Leah, you also work with precarious status and undocumented women. You're doing this work in Montreal. How does this resonate with what you're seeing?
Well, I think that's the perfect word for it. I mean, really devastating in a word captures the impact that the pandemic has had for so many of the precarious status women that I work with. That we've also observed similar things to what Faye has just described for the women who are working in the informal economy. And I would say, likewise, for those who are in the formal economy, likewise to what Faye had just mentioned, they've seen these impossible expectations put on them. And it's meant for them choosing between their own personal health and their livelihood. And it's worth noting too that the vast majority of the women that I work with are in essential service sector, and they don't necessarily, with temporary residency, have access to permanent status, or even in some cases have access to healthcare. So that really brings in a whole bunch of questions as to how we're truly treating the people that are on the front lines of this pandemic.
Thanks very much. So what we're hearing then is that the pandemic has not just brought about new challenges for women, but it has exacerbated existing vulnerabilities. So it would seem that if we want to pandemic-proof our society going forward, it's the underlying conditions that we would need to address. So maybe going back to Tony in Alberta, what do you think that the women that you work with would have needed before the pandemic that would have helped them to weather the storm that we're currently in?
That's a loaded question, but I have the top three things to pandemic-proof the circumstances in which our women are living. One, probably the overwhelming number one, is a universal basic income. That is critically important to that resiliency in moving forward. Number two is universal childcare. Our women should not have to choose between, caring for their children and working. That should be something that they have access to and supported around, as we can't ignore the generational impact of global crises like this. And number three is access to the internet and having a computer. The world went virtual very quickly and left many, many people behind. So I think that's very critical in moving forward.
Thanks very much, Tony. Leah, are there specific things that the women that you work with would have needed to make it through with more safety and security?
So I completely agree with everything that Tony just said, and I would add to that list because a lot of temporary status migrants and precarious status migrants aren't included in things like income support. What I would add would be permanent residency. I think that's the kind of short and most actionable answer to this big question. However, I do feel a bit cautious in saying that permanent residency is a solution to many of the problems that we're seeing, because it's obviously just one part of a much bigger project that we need to undertake as a society if we're going to truly address the economic security of women. Of course, we would want to see better labor protections and labor conditions and social perception even of essential service workers. We need to really come to terms with the critical role that they play in our society and to value it. But that again is to just one part of this much bigger challenge that we're facing. And so moving forward, I would say that I'm not super great at coming up with solutions. I'm really much more seasoned at pointing out problems. But what I would hope would be that we move towards an economy that is based on inclusive feminist principles and that reimagines not only the way that we work, but also how we redistribute wealth and power.
Thank you, Leah. Faye, is there anything that you would add to that list? And what do you think all of this tells us about where we need to go? I think Leah already started us in that conversation, but where do we need to go as we rebuild?
I would absolutely agree with permanent status on arrival for all migrants and regularization of status for everyone who is here in Canada, and paid sick days. How can we a year into the pandemic still not have paid sick days? But what we need in going forward is an economy that is actually premised on human and human well-being and the well-being of the natural world of which we are a part, not something that is focused on profit maximization. We talk as if we have the values of human well-being. We talk about essential work, but the way that our economy is structured is not actually designed to prioritize that or to deliver it. So what we are seeing in the pandemic is exactly the precarity, the dehumanization, that the system is designed to create and to use in a functional way to profit some, not others. What we need is an economy that truly leaves no one behind.
Thank you very much, all three of you, for sharing your time and your thoughts and expertise with us today. I know there's a lot more that could be said about what you're doing and seeing in your communities and where we need to go next. So thank you for giving us a window into all of this for us.
Thank you very much to our incredible grantees. If some of you are on the line, just wanted to thank you again for sharing your insights and your recommendations for a way forward. So now I'm going to pass it over to Susan Duncan, who's the Vice President of Philanthropy, for an exciting announcement.
Thank you so much, Sally. And I'm also here with Beth Malcolm, who we heard a little bit about earlier today, and I'm really pleased to get to have a conversation with Beth today. So as Sally mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Philanthropy at the Canadian Women's Foundation, and I want to take a moment to thank you all, every partner, every supporter, every champion, every advocate, all of you who are here today, all of you who are watching this later. Thank you for making the world better for women, girls, and gender diverse people in Canada. We've talked about a lot of moments that are being marked tonight. And tonight we're also marking a bittersweet fact that the foundation is saying goodbye to Beth Malcolm in her retirement this year. Many of you here know Beth from her 16 years at the foundation. And I want to take this opportunity to reflect with her about the experiences that she's had and some of her hopes for the future. So welcome, Beth.
Hello, Suzanne. It's nice, and friends throughout the country.
So Beth, tell us a little bit about what you've seen over the last 16 years at the foundation.
Well, 16 years is really hard to believe. When I first came to the Canadian Women's Foundation, it was to cover a parental leave. I thought I'd be here for 6 months because back then that's how long parental leaves were. But as that contract was coming to an end, the Girls Fund was launching. So I stayed, and I was so happy to be able to stay at the foundation. I feel really fortunate to have spent so much of my career working with programs and organizations like we've heard from today. I've seen the commitment and resilience of these organizations, the staff, and the people who participated in the programs. They've kindly shared their stories with me throughout the years, and they truly have left an impact in my heart. I've had the privilege of seeing this from the national perspective. At the foundation, this vantage point helps us see the common gender equity issues everyone faces and where they differ in different regions of the country and for certain groups of people. I've also had the privilege of seeing emerging issues at the grassroots level too. Sometimes we could provide resources to help, and sometimes all we could do was raise the issue and bring it to the attention of decision makers who might be able to make a difference. But through it all, it's really become clear that local community programs, while they're important, they can only do so much. We need to pay more attention to the root causes of gender injustice, and we need to push for systemic change. And unfortunately, this has all become much more evident during the pandemic. When I think about the Girls Fund programs that we've funded over the years, and as everyone at the foundation knows, that's close to my heart, the Girls Fund, we've seen amazing results. We've seen girls gain confidence, a sense of belonging, critical thinking skills, but they still have to navigate those same environments where they face sexism, discrimination, racism, ableism. And as a shout out to some of the girls programs who focus on STEM, this isn't rocket science. We need to change the environment and the systems that are harming these girls. And when we think about our economic development programs that we've heard from today, where we may be helping women start their own business or enter the trades, we also need to address the gender pay gap, sick days, power differentials in corporations and in the nonprofit, systemic racism at work, and more. It's not just about upskilling individuals. It's about breaking the big barriers that are getting in the way. Funding programs to deliver services to help people today is critical, but eventually we have to look at changing the inequitable systems that they struggle in so that no one else has to struggle in the same ways tomorrow. Sorry, that was my rant for some of the things I've seen, but I really feel committed to thinking about the systemic change issues while not forgetting about the important programs that are happening on the ground.
Well, Beth, I could listen to you all day, and I really like your perspective of being able to see what was happening at that ground level and how we need to really make sure we lift that up and tackle the systems issues. So we've talked tonight a lot about the challenges and the fears that the pandemic has brought to light in the last year. I'm wondering today, what's giving you hope?
That's a very good question, because I think sometimes, particularly these days, sometimes it's hard to think about what can bring us hope. But I am hopeful because I think that people are talking about the right things. They're not abandoning the need to help people where they're at, whether that be providing shelter or counseling or programs for youth. But I am seeing so much more interest in systems change. People are asking questions about how do we get at the root causes of gender-based violence versus just, okay, how do we help people after they've experienced violence? Or they're asking, how do we break down the barriers that too many women are facing in the workplace versus how do we help a woman get a job and not necessarily think about how do we change the environment that they're working in? And there's growing awareness about systemic barriers that are due to issues like racism and ableism and transphobia. And I'm really optimistic that deep change in gender justice is possible. And partly because of the younger folks, I say that as a person retiring, but I really think that we need to listen to younger folks in our communities and in our environments. They have their fingers on the pulse of what needs to happen. And I'm also hopeful that the foundation is a strong voice for gender justice. We've learned to listen and take the lead from women and gender diverse people and communities themselves. And we can always do better. But I really think that the foundation is a strong voice and we can help amplify the voices of others. So we can't let the advances that we've all worked so hard for disappear over the years. We need to accelerate this change and strive for gender justice. And I know, as you mentioned earlier, Suzanne, about thanking our partners, I know our partners, our allies, our supporters, our colleagues will make that happen, because gender justice means everyone wins.
That's wonderful, Beth. You know, your unwavering commitment has been inspiring. And, you know, you and I have talked a lot, and you've talked a lot at the organization about gender justice, about systems change. And that's why, you know, I'm very pleased to announce that we're launching a new initiative right now. And that initiative is called Moves for Gender Justice. We're going to be asking everyone to join Beth to demonstrate commitment to big moves for livable, fair wages, for freedom from violence, for opportunities to thrive, for human rights and dignity. Big moves for justice. You're going to hear a lot more about this from us in the coming days and weeks, and we'll be asking you to spread the word, make a gift, and band together so that we can move this dial on gender justice. This is such a fitting moment to do this as we are, you know, in our 30th anniversary, and as we're marking this moment of Beth leaving the organization. We really want to bring everyone together to be champions like Beth's been, like so many of the people here on this call today and in this webinar have been. Want to bring everyone together to really move the dial on gender justice. So on that hopeful note, we're going to close tonight. You're going to hear more from us, and we're going to ask you to do a brief survey. And we're going to ask you also to maybe join us at the celebration of Black women's voices on the journey towards gender equality, which is a great talk we have coming up on February 19th. You can see some information about this in the chat, including the link you can go to sign up for this. We want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Please stay safe, please stay close, and have a wonderful evening.